In today's lecture, we're going to be covering Chapter 16, where we're going to go over operant antecedent control procedures. So we've actually already talked about antecedent stimuli, things that happen in advance of operant behaviors. But this time we're going to be talking about how we can manipulate them in order to change certain behaviors down the line. But as an official definition, we can talk about operant antecedents or controlling stimuli, and we can talk about them as being any stimuli or events that change the probability of an operant behavior occurring. And as I said, we've already talked about two different controlling stimuli so far in the course. We've talked about our discriminative stimulus, our SDs, and our extinction stimulus, our S deltas. There's also a third type of controlling stimulus, our SAVEs, which are conditioned aversive stimuli, but we're going to be talking about those in Chapter 17, so I'll make you aware that they exist here, but we won't talk about them in this chapter quite yet. As a refresher, our SDs are going to be a stimulus or event that precedes an operant behavior and sets the occasion for its reinforcement. Basically, it's a thing that tells you that a behavior is going to be reinforced. So it's the situation in which a behavior will be reinforced, or something like that. As always, we use stimulus as a very loose term, meaning any kind of factor in our environment. For a reminder of our extinction stimulus, or our S delta, that's going to be a stimulus or event that precedes an operant and sets the occasion for its non-reinforcement. Basically the opposite of our discriminative stimulus, that's telling us when a particular behavior will not be reinforced. So working together, our SD and S delta tell us if a behavior will or will not be reinforced. So when there is an SD present, then that behavior is going to be more likely to occur because in that situation, the behavior would be followed by a reinforcer. If an S delta is present, then the behavior is going to be less likely to occur because that behavior won't be followed by a reinforcer. Okay, so that sets the ground rules for some of the terms we're going to need moving forward. For our next step, I want to get you to consider a question. So starting with a situation where we have a pigeon who's been trained to peck when a green light is on. So pigeon in an operant box, they can peck this key when our green light is on, and that green light is a discriminative stimulus that tells us that if they peck that key while the light is on, they will get food as a reinforcer. So if we don't want to use extinction, how can we prevent that pigeon from pecking? Well, we can change the situation. If we remove that SD, if we change the situation so that now it's an S delta, it's an extinction stimulus, there's no light present, then the pigeon shouldn't peck because that SD is controlling or manipulating our situation. So by switching the environment from an SD to an S delta, we have effectively manipulated the controlling or antecedent stimuli that are influencing that pecking behavior, that operant response. So we can actually change the likelihood of that behavior occurring simply by affecting our antecedent stimuli. And so from that example, we get this idea that our antecedent control procedures are going to involve manipulating our controlling stimuli, our antecedent stimuli in our environment to make a desirable behavior more likely to occur and an undesirable behavior less likely to occur. So very similar to what we talked about in the previous chapter with our differential reinforcement, where we would reinforce the desirable behavior and put the undesirable behavior through extinction. This is another step that usually goes hand in hand with differential reinforcement, where we start manipulating the stimuli in our environment to make those desirable behaviors more likely to occur so that they can be reinforced, and to make the undesirable behaviors less likely to occur, giving us more room for the desirable behaviors to occur. So this isn't meant to be sort of instead of a differential reinforcement. This is usually done in combination with differential reinforcement. So the two together tend to work better. All right, and so we're going to talk about two distinct classes or types of manipulations. The first will be the procedures that help us increase our desirable behaviors. And then later on, we'll look at procedures that decrease the undesirable behaviors. But we have 4 here that we're going to talk about, and each of these gets its own slide. So let's start with number 1. And this is when you would present our SD for a desired behavior. Basically, we want to adjust the environment, add a stimulus or some kind of feature that's going to make the behavior more likely to occur. So with our pigeon in an operant box, we could turn on the green light that makes them more likely to peck the key because that SD tells them that pecking the key would be followed by a reinforcer. Now, it will be important to note that the way that I've been talking about these, it's not saying that you're presenting an SD to make the desired behavior occur 100% of the time. We're just saying that it's going to be more likely to occur. We're altering the probability when we're talking about all of these, but none of these procedures are going to be sort of a 100% all the time success. We're just making it more likely. We're increasing the probability of that behavior occurring, or later on we'll talk about decreasing probability, but we're just doing probability. It's not a guarantee. With this concept of presenting an SD in order to make a desired behavior more likely to occur, because the SD tells us that that the behavior is going to be reinforced in that situation. So it makes logical sense. But let's look at some practical examples to help frame this in our minds. So if we wanted to look at someone who wants to study more, changing your SD, you could alter your study space, alter your environment so that it's clean, free of distractions, and that your study materials are readily available. You're setting your environment up for successful studying, to do a good job at studying. You could also schedule study periods with a clear start and stop, and keep accurate records of your schedule. Again, adjusting your environment to make that behavior more successful. Similarly, we can look at healthy eating. If you have healthy foods readily available, if you specifically read food labels before you purchase them to make sure that those foods are going to be healthy, if you post inspirational pictures or quotes in areas that you would usually have troubles with, you're again changing your environment to make that goal of healthy eating, to make that behavior of eating healthy a more reinforcing situation. You've changed your environment so that when you eat, you're going to eat healthy and you're going to achieve your goals. For depression, you could schedule more pleasant activities, changing your environment to do the behavior of doing these activities, and at the outcome, you get to experience a pleasant activity that can help sort of feel better. If you have problems with social interactions, you can use self-instruction to help guide you through those interactions so that the conversations go better. You have a positive outcome. If you have poor behaviors, things like smoking, drinking, other kinds of indulgences, maybe you want to keep company with people who don't use those substances. So by being in company with people who don't use those substances, you're more likely to copy their behaviors and have the positive outcome of not smoking, drinking, or doing other things. Our next method of increasing desirable behavior is to develop new SDs by specifically limiting the occurrence of your desirable behavior to a new specific situation. So you can get the desired behavior to occur in new environments or situations specific to that behavior to try and avoid overlap with other behaviors. And this will help prevent competing behaviors, those undesirable behaviors, from interfering with your desired behaviors. So, as an example, if you have insomnia, maybe you want to start using the bed only for sleeping. You're not going to study in bed. You're not going to eat or watch TV in bed. The bed is only for sleeping. So you're going to turn that into a new SD for sleeping. And so if you're trying to sleep and it's not working, you're going to get up and leave until you're sleepy again. So you're not using the bed for laying awake and not sleeping. So you're setting a new SD that tells you that this is the place where you are going to sleep. And hopefully that will lead to you sleeping. For studying, again, we can have a specific study area and a specific study time. So you set aside an environment in which you are set up to study. So you make a new S delta for that space and that time, and that will be your study time, the outcome being that you study successfully. You don't want to be in that area if you're eating or chatting or daydreaming, anything other than studying. So that environment, that SD, is specific to that behavior and no other behaviors. The same idea with healthy eating. So you'd only have food in food areas, only eat in eating environments. You don't want to do other things that aren't related to eating and food in those areas. And you want to just eat. You don't want other activities interfering. So a new a new SD for food-related things in your food environment. And continuing with exercising, you have a specific schedule to start and stop time for exercising. You only exercise at the gym, a designated place. Those become SDs for exercising and only exercising. Same basic idea, just applied across a bunch of different settings. Our third method of increasing desirable behavior would be to arrange establishing operations, or EOs, for desirable behavior. So you might remember that our establishing operations are things that make our reinforcer more reinforcing. You want to make the outcome of your desirable behavior more appealing. And for our examples, we can go back to insomnia and healthy eating. But with insomnia, an establishing operation would be to try and make sure that you are sleepy so that you fall asleep at the end of the day. And how can you make yourself more sleepy by the end of the day? Well, avoid taking naps at any point other than when you're going to bed at night. Only go to bed when you're actually tired and wake up at the same time each day. So set a routine to encourage that feeling of tiredness at the end of the day. And that means that the outcome of actually going to sleep when you're supposed to is that the sleep is more restorative and it feels better because you are actually tired. For healthy eating, maybe you're going to purchase fresher, better tasting foods. Or maybe you're going to cook with more varied foods. Maybe you get a special cookbook that's going to make your meals taste amazing and be healthy. So that when you're trying to eat healthy, the outcome, the sort of end product is even better, which makes you want to eat more of that healthy food because it's a better food. So you're setting it up so that that outcome of getting to eat the food, the healthy food, is even better. Then the last of our procedures for increasing a desirable behavior is to actually decrease the response effort for that desirable behavior. Basically, you want to make it easier to do the desirable behavior. You want that to be the easiest course of action. So arrange your environment so that it's ready to go when you need that behavior to occur. Exclude any extra steps that you don't need to be there. Or maybe you can break the desired behavior up into smaller, more manageable tasks. Anything that you can do to make that desired behavior easier to occur is going to make it more likely to occur. because we always want to do the easy thing. So for studying, maybe you want to make sure that your study materials are out and accessible so that as soon as the mood strikes you to study, it can happen immediately. If you're supposed to be practicing an instrument, keep your musical instruments set up and easily accessible so that once the mood strikes you, you are more likely to do that behavior. And with your healthy eating, keep the kitchen tidy and well stocked with good food so that when you want to eat that healthy food, it's easy to do. And that all makes it more likely for your desired behavior to occur. All right, so that was part 1 of this process. We've made our desirable behavior more likely to occur. Now let's do the opposite and make our undesirable behaviors less likely to occur. And we have 5 different ways of doing this here. The first of which is removing our SDs for the undesirable behaviors. And this is usually a process that you would use if extinction isn't possible. Extinction would probably be a far more effective method of getting this behavior to occur less, but sometimes that's not possible. So if we remove the stimuli that make an undesirable behavior more likely to occur, then the behavior is less likely to occur. If you take away the things that prompt that behavior to happen, then it's going to happen less and less often. So if we can adjust our environment so that it doesn't occur to us to do that behavior, then that bad behavior is going to be seen quite a bit less. So for our examples, some people who experience depression end up staying in the same environment where they're surrounded by the things that remind them of having felt depressed and not left this environment in a long time. Maybe they don't get out of bed for days and days on end. But if we wanted to change the environment to try and edge away from that depressive feeling, maybe just moving to a different environment, something that offers more pleasant activities and opportunities for reinforcing other behaviors might be beneficial, and getting away from the stimuli that encourage that feeling of sort of dread and oppression. For smoking, drinking, and other indulgences, back to that example, you can alter the location. So if there's a place like a local bar where whenever you go there, you usually have a few drinks, if you're trying not to drink, then maybe don't go to that bar. If you have a corner of your house where you usually have a setup of alcohol and you would have drinks, then maybe rearrange the furniture there. Maybe don't sit in that corner. Alter your environment so that it's less likely that you're going to drink. You can even find distracting activities so that you don't focus on any existing SDs so that you can avoid those behaviors. And SDs can also be other people who use those substances. So those people can serve as a sort of trigger of those behaviors. So if you avoid them, you're going to be less likely to drink. For our second option, we can simply make the behavior impossible. If you adjust the situation that you're in or the environment that you're in so that the undesirable behavior is impossible, then by the very definition of that, then the behavior cannot physically happen. So for examples, to clear this one up a little bit, if you have problems with social media addiction, if you unsubscribe from social media, if you don't have those apps on your phone, then you can't spend hours and hours scrolling through those apps on your phone because you physically don't have them. If you're trying to avoid eating fast food, then maybe you don't carry money around so that you can't go out and buy fast food. Or procrastinating. If you always spend time on your electronic devices instead of studying, then maybe don't bring them with you. Or go to a place where using those devices is frowned upon. So go to the library in a quiet area so that you can't talk to other people on your phone or something like that. So set the environment up so that you can't do the thing that's causing problems. We can also present abolishing behavior or abolishing operations for those undesirable behaviors. So the opposite of our EOs from before, we can have AOs. So our abolishing operations make the outcome of the undesirable behavior less appealing. So make the reinforcer of that behavior less reinforcing. For healthy eating, maybe you eat before you go out. If you're not hungry, if you're full, then it's less appealing to buy junk food. If you consume water and other healthy fibrous foods, things that are going to fill your stomach, then you're going to be less likely to snack because you're no longer hungry. Or maybe it's as simple as brushing your teeth prior to a time when you might be tempted to eat junk food. I use this technique all the time. When I'm sitting at my computer putting together slides, I absolutely love to snack. But it's a mindless thing and I really don't want to do it, so I brush my teeth. Which means that if I do snack, it tastes awful. It's less appealing because now it tastes like toothpaste. So that's one way to change the situation so that it's less appealing to do the behavior. For our insomnia example, maybe you get lots of physical exercise so that your body is so tired, and then staying awake is even less appealing. For our fourth option of decreasing undesirable behaviors, maybe you want to increase the response effort or sort of force a delay of the undesirable behaviors. So again, kind of the opposite of us talking about making it easier or less effortful to do the good thing. Maybe if we make it harder to do the bad thing, that'll help decrease those undesirable behaviors. And for this delay of undesirable behaviors, it's sort of helpful if you do something like pausing to make a record of the behavior and what's going on in the situation. So if you're trying to avoid snack food, then maybe take a break. You know that you're craving snack food, so stop for a minute. Take out a piece of paper and write down, this is the time I'm craving snack food. What in my environment might be leading me to crave snack food? And by giving yourself something to do, you're delaying actually getting that snack food. And then hopefully over time, you can pause more and more and sort of push off the reinforcer of actually snacking. So maybe you can assess the necessity of actually engaging in that behavior, and by forcing yourself to stop and think about it, you get out of that momentary intense need for it, and maybe you can talk yourself out of it. Some other examples, still with the healthy eating idea, would be if you're making it harder to eat junk food, then maybe get rid of all your junk food so that you would actually have to go out to a store and buy new junk food. It's easier to eat the healthy food you have on hand, and it's harder to get junk food because you'd have to leave and go get some. Or if we're delaying, then maybe you're going to force yourself to chew your food a specific number of times each bite so that you can't just eat all of your food all at once. You're forcing that delay so that you can go more slowly and actually enjoy each bite. And then for our last procedure to decrease undesirable behavior, we can actually extinguish SDs for undesirable behaviors if they can't be easily avoided. So at the very beginning, we talked about reducing the presence of those SDs so that you don't have to be prompted into going through a particular behavior. If you can't do that, then maybe you do have to go through extinction so that those SDs no longer make you feel the need to do that behavior. So make our environmental stimuli less likely to lead to our undesired behavior. And as an example, we have one specific situation where an individual was experiencing excessive urination. Basically, their undesirable behavior was that they would use the washroom an excessive amount of times during the day. So we can do some baseline observations, and they have two clear antecedents for this excessive washroom use. The first was that they never went to the washroom without using the toilet. So if they went to the washroom to do an unrelated task, maybe they were going to wash their face or comb their hair, they would always use the toilet while they were there. The second thing that they noted was that using the toilet at the first hint of bladder pressure. So if this individual had any sense that they might need to pee in the future, they would immediately use the toilet. And so our SDs in this case are being in the washroom and feeling any kind of bladder pressure. Our behavior is urination, and the reinforcer in this situation would be the removal of bladder pressure, so feeling that relief. And so for a treatment, if we're trying to extinguish our two SDs, we have two treatments. The first would be to actually practice going into the washroom to perform a behavior unrelated to the toilet and to leave without using the toilet. So go into the bathroom, brush your hair, and walk out without using the bathroom. The second was upon feeling a hint of bladder pressure, this individual would pause for 5 minutes before they'd be allowed to go and urinate. So they'd force themselves to wait to be aware of that pressure, but not be able to do anything about it for a certain amount of time. And both of these combined helped this individual avoid using the bathroom every single time they went into the room. Instead, they would use it less and less often, only when it was necessary, as opposed to every single time the opportunity to presented itself. All right, so as our wrap up here, we're going to look at just a couple of other tips and tricks, things to keep in mind in terms of increasing desirable behavior and decreasing undesirable behavior. The first is that we should watch for behavior chains. So if we have a series of behaviors, it's often easier to modify things that happen earlier on in that chain than later in the chain. So if we're trying to see if I can come up with an example. Let's stick with the same one we've been using. Someone's trying to avoid eating junk food. So that behavior chain would be you think about eating junk food. Then maybe you go to the kitchen, and in the kitchen you see junk food. And then you open up the junk food and then you eat it. It's probably a lot easier to interrupt the thought of eating junk food than it is to interrupt actually going and opening the bag of whatever your food of choice is. So it's easier to intervene earlier on than when the chain has kind of gotten some momentum and you're later on. Another tip would be to actually modify the environments gradually. So take baby steps. Rather than try and take on the entire situation all at once, maybe focus on one piece at a time. If you have an undesirable behavior that's occurring in lots of different places, maybe focus on the first place, one place, maybe the one where it's the most detrimental. And then once you've sort of reduced the rate of that behavior occurring in that one environment, then maybe you get to reduce it in another environment. But don't try and reduce it in all situations at all times right off the bat. It's going to be a lot easier, say if you're cutting out junk food again. It's a lot easier to stop eating junk food at home than it is to stop eating junk food everywhere at all times. Maybe you focus on stopping eating junk food at home, and then you stop eating junk food when you're out with friends. And then you stop eating junk food when you're on campus or wherever. So start with smaller steps and then expand from there. And the same goes for trying to get desired behaviors to occur in multiple places too. So start to exercise when you're at home, but then also start to exercise if you go away for the weekend or whatever. So start with a small step and then expand from there. Don't try and do everything all at once. Our next tip is that if you fail to avoid a particular situation, then try and escape it. If You are like me and you're trying to avoid snacking while doing schoolwork, but you find yourself somehow sitting here with a bag of chips. And if you realize that, oh man, I didn't avoid eating chips, I'm now eating chips, well, let's escape the situation. Let's roll the bag up, put a clip on it, and put them away. We didn't do a good job at avoiding it, but we can escape it now and we can try again next time. Which ties into our next point, which is that engaging in an undesirable behavior is not the end of the world. Even talking through some of the examples here, not all of these examples are immediately applicable, and sometimes we're just trying to nudge our behavior one way or the other. In trying to sort of decrease behaviors that are associated with depression, like I said at the beginning, our goal isn't to immediately stop all negative behaviors all the time. We're just trying to reduce them. So, if an undesirable behavior does happen, it's not the end of the world. We're just trying to reduce the occurrence of them and increase the occurrence of those desirable behaviors, but it's going to be a process. And then our last point is that we want to modify as many elements in the environment as possible. So the more things that we can modify, the more controlling stimuli that we can stack in our favor, the higher our chances of success. So even though we talked about these 9 separate procedures, you can combine and use multiples of these all together. And as I said, we often want to combine these antecedent controlling procedures along with differential reinforcement. So none of these concepts are standalone ideas. We want to do as many things as possible all at once to give us a better chance of success.